Hi everyone, welcome to Unit 4. We are in Module 20 and we are talking about hearing today. Here are your learning objectives and here are your vocab. Pause to write them down. So when we are talking about hearing, just another way to say that is audition. So the sense of hearing. And those sounds that we hear best are actually human voices. So those that would fall within the human voice level. So when we are talking about hearing, first we should really talk about the physical stimulus, and that is sound waves. So there are a couple of terms that you need to know that go along with sound waves. The first is amplitude. Amplitude is the loudness of a sound. So if you look over on the right hand image, there are some sound waves, and the one that's showing you amplitude is showing you how high that wavelength goes. So the higher it goes, the louder the pitch. The louder the sound. And the next term is frequency. So this is how many complete wavelengths. So that amplitude is showing you one wavelength. So how many go in a certain amount of time. So if it's a higher frequency, there will be more wavelengths in one time. So the frequency is showing you in that same image in the top right is showing you that there were two waves in that frequency. If you look to the high pitch, low pitch image, you see that the high pitch has many waves in a short amount of time. So that would be a higher frequency. So that kind of leads into our next one, which is pitch, and that's a tone's experienced highness or lowness, and it depends on frequency. So again, if you look over at the high pitch one, there are multiple wavelengths in a given amount of time, like let's say 1 second, right? So that means that it is very high pitched because there are a lot of there's a lot of wavelengths. And then in the low pitch, there's only two, right? In that same amount of time. So that means it's a lower pitch sound because there's a lower frequency also. The next is decibels, and that is just how we measure sound. So if you look at that colored image where it's showing you 0 is our absolute threshold for hearing, and then a whisper conversation would be like 20 decibels. Anything above the line that's in red, if you were to listen to those sounds for a prolonged amount of time, that could lead to hearing loss. So the more you're exposed to them, the more you're disturbing your hearing. All right, so now we have to get into the anatomy of the ear. So first you have the outer ear. So it's this part right here. It's also called the pinna. And sometimes they use that word. I know it's not a vocab, but sometimes they use that word to label it because that's technically what it's called. And that's just the part that you can look at. And if you notice, it's kind of like a funnel, right? So it's funneling the sound inward. Then you have the middle ear, and this goes from, if you're looking at the diagram, from the eardrum, and it ends at the cochlea. So this is where a lot happens. And it contains 3 tiny bones that you do need to know: the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. These bones kind of like work together and they vibrate to send the message inward. There also is the eardrum. That's the beginning of it, of the middle ear. And that is this like membrane-like cover that, again, vibrates with the sound waves. So this vibration gets sent to the inner ear. And the inner ear contains the cochlea, the basilar membrane, which has hair cells on it, and this message gets sent along after that. So the cochlea is that coiled, kind of snail-like looking image, and at the bottom it's kind of, they've done a zoom in on it so you can see it more closely. You can also see the hammer, anvil, and stirrup in that picture. So the cochlea is filled with fluid. I know, it's kind of gross. And it's like this tube in your inner ear, and it has along the bottom of it and the top, it has these little hair cells. And you want to think of the hair cells as like a carpet. So when the message, and it's filled with fluids, when that vibration happens, it causes that fluid to move, right? Which makes the hair cells move. And when the hair cells move, that's sending a neural message onto the auditory nerve. Okay, so the movement of the hair cells on the basilar membrane, which is in the cochlea, that's what sends the message to the auditory nerve. And so the auditory nerve is that collection of nerves. It's kind of wind up, kind of like the optic nerve when we were talking about the eye. And that's what's going to send the message to the thalamus and then to the auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. So some people experience hearing loss, and there are two different types that you need to know. Sensorineural hearing loss. This is a more common hearing loss, and this is damage to those hair cells we were talking about. And it can be from age, it can be from listening to too high of a decibel of sound for too long. It can be as a result of disease or some sort of infection. And it's also known as nerve deafness. So there's a hearing aid that you see in the first image that could be used for sensorineural hearing loss. There's also something called conduction hearing loss. And this is damage to the mechanical system that conducts the sound waves to the cochlea. So if you look at this image where it's kind of showing you some sort of conductive hearing loss is more in the middle ear, outer ear area, and sensorineural hearing loss is more in the inner ear, so usually with the hair cells. So some people use a cochlear implant, and I have a picture of this in the top right, and this is for nerve deafness, and that converts the sound into an electrical signal, and it stimulates the auditory nerve. So basically, if those hair cells are damaged, it can kind of replace that part in the hearing process. In the bottom left, there's a picture of normal cochlea, and you can see the hair cells in that image. And then in the damaged cochlea, you can see how it kind of almost looks like there's missing hair cells, and they're probably like flattened or like going in different directions or whatever, but you really can't see them in that spot. So that shows you hearing loss in the hair cells. Okay, so now there are two theories of pitch that you need to know. The first is place theory. So this one, we're going to focus on the cochlea. So this theory says that the pitch we hear depends on the place where the cochlea's membrane is stimulated. So if it's a higher frequency, it produces a loud vibration, and that happens at the beginning of the cochlea. So this blue right here is the high frequency. It would happen at the beginning of the cochlea. Now a low frequency, this theory says, it causes more of a vibration throughout the whole cochlea. So place theory says that you would get stimulated hair cells throughout the whole cochlea, including all the way here at the end. So it would go all the way up here, whereas high frequency would go only at the beginning. So this theory is really good for how we hear a high-pitched sound. It seems to be accurate for that, but it has some problems with low-pitched. It doesn't quite explain how we hear low-pitched sounds completely. So the second theory that you need to know is called frequency theory. And this theory is just like, think of the word frequent, right? How fast the nerve impulses are traveling up the auditory nerve, it matches the frequency of the tone. So if it's a high frequency sound, then the nerve impulses are going to go faster. They're going to move faster. But the problem with this theory, so both theories have a problem, and the problem with frequency theory is that no neuron can fire faster than 1,000 times per second, and yet we can still sense sounds with frequencies that require it to do more than 1,000 times per second. So for example, the upper third of the piano, is faster than 1,000 per second. So we kind of use both of them. We use place theory to explain high-pitched sounds, and we use frequency theory to explain low-pitched sounds. And then for those super high-pitched sounds that neither seems to do well, there's an idea called the Volley Principle. And so imagine that just like to get a really fast sound, you need like a whole group of neurons. So the neural cells alternate firing so that they can basically replicate how fast the frequency is in a way that if they all work together, they can send that one message. So if you look at the top of this image in the right here, there's the original sound wave. So see how fast it is. And then neuron A is only firing certain wavelengths. B is doing different ones, C, and they're in this like transcending pattern, right? And so total, the brain gets all of those messages, but no one neuron has to send the whole message because it can't send it as fast as the sound wave is. I hope that makes sense. I know this Volley Principle is a little confusing. So just think of them as like a little army of neurons, and they all are firing part of the whole message. So together, our brain can get the whole message. And then place theory is high, frequency theory is low. So how do we locate sounds? So we have two ears for a reason. If you only had one working ear, then you would have trouble at times knowing the location of someone. If you're in the dark and you are trying to locate someone or a sound of some sort, your ears are sending your brain information that you're not necessarily consciously processing, right? So if you hear sound from over here, this ear gets the message first. Like your brain knows that the sound is traveling to this ear faster than it's got to go around to get to this ear, and this ear is hearing it a little lagged. So that tells your brain that, oh, I should turn my head this way to look at the person talking to me or whatever sound I'm trying to look at. So it tells us how to direct our attention. All right, so takeaways. Make sure you know the difference between amplitude, which is loudness, frequency, which is how fast a wavelength is going, and frequency helps us tell pitch, which is determined by how frequent the wavelength is, how many. Make sure you understand transduction, how it occurs in the ear. So that's just the process of going from the pinna through the middle ear to the inner ear and then to the temporal lobe. So make sure you know the order of events there. Make sure you know the difference between the two types of hearing loss. So when you think of sensorineural, you need to think nerve damage to hair cells. And the other one is a mechanical problem, and that's more in the middle to outer ear. And then finally, make sure you know those two theories of pitch and which one is preferred for high and which one is preferred for low. And then Volley Principle kind of explains it all. So that wraps up the ear and hearing, and I will see you